Okay, so Miss Thomas here with bringing you guys your first virtual lesson of our new unit, and this is our second biology unit of the year. I know Mr. Byatt and I told you we were going to be doing a chemistry unit next, but we decided together earlier this week, once we went virtual, that it's best to do biology now because that one has much easier to do virtual labs, and then hopefully back together on campus to do your chemistry at the last unit of the year and be able to do some actual physical labs for that. So the unit title is called Change, Adapt, and Evolve. Our first lesson is our Introduction to Evolution. We're setting up your notebook and talking about Charles Darwin a little bit here to get started today. So you're going to have a few different pages like we always do with your unit title page, table of contents, numbering our pages, all that kind of stuff. So start off by doing your table of contents, doing your title page. So go ahead and make a title page, the next page in your notebook. And if your notebook is almost empty, you might want to start with a new notebook. So take a minute, pause the video, and do your page. Okay, so your title page should now be done. The next page is your table of contents. So you can choose to do this as a single page like I have, or two pages at this point in the year. You know how much space you need for table of contents. One page, two, it's up to you. So make sure you have these things in it: the title page, table of contents, the phenomenon, big ideas. Okay, and next we have our phenomenon page. Our phenomenon question is, how have species evolved over time? And you divide this two-pager into I notice and wonder and what I first think on the one side. You'll be doing that today after you watch the phenomenon video. And then I learned about and what I think now. We'll be coming back to those at the end of the unit. So pause me for a second and go ahead and draw that in your notebook. Okay, so now that you have that drawn, what you need to do is you're going to go to the link posted here that has the link to the TED Ed video talking about our phenomenon. And our phenomenon is about the science of skin color. So go ahead and pause me and go to watch that video. And then while you're doing so, answer the two questions here. The I notice, wonder question up here, as well as the what I first think question over here. Okay, so pause the video and pause me and watch the phenomenon video. Okay, so now you should have watched the video and filled in these two. Remember, you need to at least write 3 sentences or 3 very long bullet points for each one to show what you noticed and what you think about when you watch that video and what you first think answers the question. So what do you first think is the answer to how have species evolved over time? Next, we have our big ideas page. So just write your 4 big ideas. It's a 2-pager with a nice light bulb in the center, and we'll go back and fill this in throughout the unit as we have in our previous units as well. Okay, and this is the template for today's short lesson. So it's a 1-pager. We have Darwin versus Wallace. Who were they? What did they do? And why Darwin and not Wallace? And there's 2 boxes here for 2 different images showing for the voyages of each of these gentlemen. So pause the video and draw your template. And here's a picture of my template if you're not sure how to space it. Sometimes it's hard to tell on the landscape format of the slides to what it looks like in a portrait notebook. So something like this will work. Okay, hopefully now you have your template drawn out and you're ready to start the lesson. So we're going to talk about who they were. Who was Charles Darwin and who was Alfred Russel Wallace? So let's start with Darwin. He was born in 1809 and he was from a relatively wealthy family. Not crazy wealthy, but definitely a higher middle class. And his theory was developed in the late 1830s. And he took about 20 years to be able to develop this theory. From when he first kind of thought of it to gathering evidence, read it very carefully, and perfecting what his thoughts were before he published this book. And his very famous book is called On the Origin of Species. Alfred Wallace was born in 1823, so he's younger or was younger than Charles Darwin, and his mother was English, his father was Scottish, but he was born in Wales. He identified most his English throughout his life, and they were not a very well-off family. They had some money sometimes, they would go through financial hardships, go back again, back and forth. So if we look, they have very similar appearance here. We have Charles Darwin up here and Russel Wallace down here. Both of them were naturalists in a very similar time, same time in London, in England. So as a naturalist, as a title we would give to these kinds of people at that time period, they are not biologists, they're naturalists. They're studying patterns in nature. So not just living things, but the geography of the world as well. And to do this, they were really eager, both of them, to go and explore the world, go to new places, and study more new species and look for more patterns. Both of these men published and had a similar idea about evolution. So Darwin gets a lot of credit for this. When we think of who discovered evolution by natural selection, everyone thinks of Charles Darwin. But Alfred Russel Wallace also came up with the same idea at just about the same time. So in 1858, 1 year before Darwin published his book, both the men presented together the same idea about natural selection to the Linnean Society, a natural society in London. Both their ideas were very similar and they came from kind of similar experiences. So let's talk about where they gathered the information for those ideas. If you need to pause the video at any point to take notes, feel free. Again, you don't need to write down every single thing on the screen here. Summarize the key ideas. You will, of course, be given the keynote before a test. So here's just to kind of summarize them a little bit here. If you look on the left, we have Darwin. So he was born in 1809. He went to two different universities, Edinburgh and Cambridge, two very famous universities, and studied for 6 years. He went on the single voyage of the Beagle to the Galapagos and all around South America. And that was a 5-year voyage. He retired in 1842 to work on his book and then published in 1859. And he died 63 years later in 1882. I remember he's from a fairly well-off family, so he had family money to help support him. Whereas Wallace from a very different family, and he's born a little bit later, his study was not very formal. He studied at the London Mechanics Institute, but mostly just taking some night classes and doing some readings and trying to kind of develop his own education and his mind the way that he could. He couldn't afford to go to university. And then he took some surveyor training and worked as a surveyor for a long time with his brother, and was able to learn about landscapes and paid really close attention to nature and to insects in particular. So he learned a lot that way. He went on 2 different voyages, unlike Darwin's one voyage. So he went the first one to the Amazon between 1848 and 1852, and he went to collect specimens that he would then bring back with him to sell. And unfortunately, on his way back to England from South America, the ship he was on had a major accident and it caught fire, and most of his specimens were lost. So he arrived with just a few drawings he had made, and that was it. And he's able to publish a couple of books from that information, but didn't make a lot of money, just hoping to make by selling specimens. People used to collect exotic animals and pay good money for them to show kind of their wealth and as a hobby. So a few years later, he was able to afford to go back on a voyage again, and this time he went to the Malay Archipelago, that's in Southeast Asia, from 1854 to 1862. It's been a long time there, collecting further evidence. Throughout his life, he didn't publish one single major big book like Darwin did. He published very thoroughly on a variety of topics. So over 700 letters, books, and articles from 1853 to 1880. Many articles produced on different topics. He retired to a farm called Old Orchard in 1903, and he died in 1913. So because he didn't have a lot of money, he couldn't retire early and just live off his family's money and do work. He had to find ways to earn income throughout. So again, make some couple notes of this and who they were in your notebook. Don't write everything down. Look at key ideas. So let's talk about Darwin's voyage. We're going to focus on his main one, leaving from Great Britain. So he would have left here and gone down this way towards South America, Brazil, kind of hopping all over here, going up to the Galapagos Islands, which is the zoom in of it over here, which is a very important part for his research. And then he kind of went around the world, coming out here, New Zealand, Australia, Tasmania, back around the Cape of Good Hope, back to South America again, and then back up to Great Britain. And of course, this was done at a time when they had to sail. So he was sailing the entire time aboard the Beagle, and it took 5 years to do this. But he collected many specimens and learned a lot during his voyage. Here's Wallace's voyage, his second voyage. So Wallace's voyage around the Malay Islands. So here's Indonesia, and you can see he kind of went around all these different islands on multiple trips and spent many years here collecting lots of data of different organisms. So different kinds of archipelagos or groups of islands were really key for the idea of evolution and natural selection to be discovered and kind of thought of by different scientists. There's still a line here called the Wallace line, named after Alfred Wallace, and that's because the wildlife on this side is quite different from that on this side. One side has more of a Australian, New Zealand kind of descent over here, and over here it's much more Asian descent, and it's a significant difference between the wildlife on this side and this side, which is an important idea that Wallace brought to the idea of evolution. Okay, so what did they do? Well, this was a very controversial idea at the time, and both Darwin and Wallace, they proposed this mechanism for evolution to occur. So the idea that evolution was not their idea. Evolution had been an idea for many generations. In fact, Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, thought of it as well, but no one had a mechanism, no one had a way through which this could happen. So they both kind of figured this out through natural selection is the mechanism they're able to figure out. So mechanism is natural selection. That's the big contribution that Darwin made and that Wallace also thought of independently from Darwin. They were able to do this because they did these very, very thorough, intense, multiple-year studies of many, many species. And then they looked at that data very thoroughly, very carefully for a long time. And then that gave them enough data and enough understanding and confidence to publish their ideas. At the time, these were very controversial ideas. The idea to publish an idea that evolution happened, that organisms adapted over millions of years and became different and weren't just created in a 7-day creation as stated by the Bible was very, very controversial. So if you look at these cartoons here, these are published around the time and mostly mocking Darwin. So Darwin gets all the credit, but he also got all the ridicule at the time. So the idea that we have humanity bowing down to their ancestors, the apes. We have Darwin looking at an ape in a mirror here. And of course, Darwin didn't say that we evolved from apes. He was talking about common ancestors that we would have had with them, but people oversimplified it and became very offended. It's part of why it took Darwin 20 years to publish what he discovered and what he first thought of, because he had to have such a strong argument. So Darwin published his book on the origin of species. Wallace did more work on this in what's called biogeography, which is the relationships of biogeography here, is the relationship between the environment where the organisms live, the geography of it, and the life living there. The bio is life, of course, right? So biogeography was his big thing, and that's a key aspect of natural selection. Okay, so we look here, there again, Darwin and Wallace, both of them kept the theory of evolution by natural selection, and they published a single paper together at the Linnaean Society. But in society today, we only remember Darwin. He's the main one we remember. So I want you to take a minute, pause the video, and think about, what does this tell us about the way knowledge is shared and passed on in science? So hopefully you kind of thought about the fact that just because one person thought of something doesn't mean the only one who thought of it. A person's position, a person's wealth, maybe how well known a person is, all these things can influence who is remembered. And I think also a factor in here is that Darwin published such a huge, complete book on this topic, whereas Wallace published on a variety of topics. So he's a little bit less focused than Darwin is, and I think it's part of why he gets the credit more so than Wallace did. Okay, so that's our first lesson of the unit. Your homework is to complete all your notebook pages from today's, which would be your unit title page, table of contents, phenomenon, evolution, big ideas, and your Darwin versus Wallace notes. Take a picture of all of them, that's 5 pictures, and upload it to Schoology. You can put all the 5 pictures in a single Word document and upload that, but you need to give them to me completely so I can check that you've completed your work. Hope everyone's home, staying safe, staying comfy, and still making their learning happen because, as we know, the year will go by and we need to make sure we're still learning and getting ready for the 10th grade. Have a good day, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your teacher.